Good evening and welcome to the Town Hall featuring 3 of the California Redistricting Commissioners of the 14 commissioners in California, and also Ms. Carol Cunihome and Representative Steve Samuelson. My name's Jean Hanley and I am the Dauphin County Coordinator for Fair Districts PA, which is a nonpartisan, all-volunteer, citizens-led coalition to try to achieve redistricting reform in Pennsylvania. We are the ones that are sponsoring the program tonight, and I'd like to do a couple of thank yous first. I would like to thank Widener Law Commonwealth for the use of their beautiful facility, and a special thank you. A special thank you to Ms. Jill Family, Ms. Sandy Grafe, and Mr. Brian Fernbaugh for their technical and venue assistance this evening. I would like to thank PCN and other members of the media for being here to cover this important topic and event. I would also like to thank the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University for their awarding of the 2017 Roy and Lila Ash Innovation Award for Public Engagement in Government to the California Citizens Redistricting Committee. Their award is making it possible for the commissioners to do programs around the country like this. So thank you to the Ash. And obviously, thank you to our participants this evening. Redistricting and the issue of gerrymandering remains a very, very relevant and timely topic, especially in light of some of the court cases recently, and specifically the League of Women Voters versus the Commonwealth case. The decision in that case resulted in the redrawing of the congressional districts in Pennsylvania for the 2018 and the 2020 elective cycles. However, and that's a step. However, it has no bearing whatsoever on the state legislative districts, nor does it change the process, nor does it change who is drawing the lines. In 2008, California passed Proposition 11, which was the Voters First Act, and that authorized the formation of a redistricting commission, a citizens redistricting commission, to do the legislative and the congressional redistricting in California. And in December of 2010, the members of that committee and commission were formalized and they began their work. To date, they are the only independent citizen redistricting commission, truly independent in the country. This evening, you're going to hear about efforts in Pennsylvania to reform redistricting, and also the efforts, the experiences, and some of the insights of the California commissioners. After their presentations, we will have a question and answer to answer some of the questions that you've submitted. And now I'd like to introduce our participants. And starting on the end over there, Ms. Carol Cunihome. Mrs. Cunihome is co-founder and chairwoman of Fair Districts PA. She's also vice president of government and social policy on the State Board of League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. She earned a PhD in American Literature from the University of Pennsylvania and has worked for over a decade as youth pastor at the Church of the Good Samaritan in Paoli, Pennsylvania. Next, Representative Steve Samuelson, and Representative Samuelson represents PA House District 135, which is presently part of Northampton County and includes the city of Bethlehem, PA, and the surrounding areas. He's a graduate of Lehigh University. He's been a member of the PA House since 1999 and is presently the Democratic chair of the Aging and Older Adult Services Committee. He's one of the prime sponsors of HB 722, which is one of the bills that would amend the Constitution, the PA Constitution, to form an independent citizens commission. And this is an issue that he has been working on since the 2007-2008 legislative session, so he has been at this for a long time. And then our commissioners. Commissioner Gil Anti is a practicing architect, past campus director, and faculty member at Springfield College. He served as City Redevelopment Board Director for San Diego's Downtown District and as a City Planning Commissioner for 8 years. For over 30 years, he's been active in a wide range of professional, educational, health, civic, and multicultural organizations. He's a graduate of the University of Hawaii, received his master's degree from Washington University in architecture, and a doctorate degree in education. Commissioner Anti is registered with the Republican Party and lives in the city and county of San Diego. Next, we have Commissioner Jean Raya. Commissioner Raya is an agency principal with the John L. Raya Insurance Agency, family-owned business established in 1960, and under her leadership, the agency has developed expertise working with nonprofit organizations and medical facilities. Commissioner Raya received a bachelor's degree from the University of Southern California, law degree from UC Davis. She was staff counsel for the Board of Equalization and Public Employment Relations Board and maintained a private law practice for 14 years. She served as president of the California La Raza Lawyers Association, as a member of the California Committee of Bar Examiners, and as president of the San Gabriel Chamber of Commerce. She currently serves on the Foundation Board of California Hospital in downtown Los Angeles, and Commissioner Raya is a registered Democrat and lives in the city of San Gabriel in Los Angeles County. And Commissioner Stanley Forbes. For the past 32 years, Commissioner Forbes has been co-owner of Avid Reader, an independent retail bookstore. He has also spent the last 40 years operating a family ranch and all of the management and regulatory and organizational issues that entails. He served on the school board, Davis City Council, and as president of the Davis Downtown Business Association. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Southern California, a master's degree from UCLA, and a law degree from Vanderbilt University. And Commissioner Forbes is registered as declined to state and lives in Esparto in Yolo County, California. So welcome to our panel. I think we are we're in for a very informative and interesting evening, and with that, I would ask Ms. Cunningham to start the presentations.
Thank you so much, Jean, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for being interested in this topic. Thank you for caring about the future of our democracy and representation, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally. We've become part of a national conversation about representation, and as our California friends kind of led the way in independent redistricting, we are the state that people are looking to say, is it possible in a state that does not have citizen initiative and referendum? Is reform possible in such a state? And is it possible in a state where two parties have entrenched themselves so deeply that they control every move in our elections and in what happens in Harrisburg? Is it possible for people's voices to be heard? Is it possible for citizens' concerns to be recognized? And is it possible to change the process in a way that restores real representation at the polls? We're in the middle of that conversation, and we don't know the outcome. But we are positive, we are encouraged, and we are determined to put in place an independent redistricting commission here in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to say much about that because we really want to hear from our California commissioners, and we want to hear from our sponsor, Steve Samuelson. I just wanted to call attention to the fact this conversation has been going on a long time. In 1987, Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, at the Republican governor's annual dinner, said the fact is gerrymandering, and he was very emphatic that it should be gerrymandering. He said the fact is gerrymandering has become a national scandal. The Democratic-controlled state legislatures have so rigged the electoral process that the will of the people cannot be heard. They vote Republican but elect Democrats. A look at the district lines shows how corrupt the whole process has become. The congressional map is a horror show of grotesque, contorted shapes. Districts jump back and forth over mountain ranges, cross large bodies of water, send out little tentacles to absorb special communities, and ensure safe seats. It sounds like he's describing our current congressional map, and we have to say, anybody who's looked at a map and looked at the progress of gerrymandering knows that it has become far, far worse than anything that he imagined back in 1987. Our new technologies make it possible to carve up our districts with great precision. And what he said then is far beyond what it was then. In 1987, he said, it's time to do something about it. And we say, here we are, 31 years later, and it is certainly time to do something about it now. We're excited that there will be a hearing tomorrow morning with the Senate State Government Committee. That's not a guarantee that it will be given a vote there. There's no guarantee it will be given a vote in either house, but we continue to do everything that we can to call public attention to this, to make this a statewide conversation and a national conversation, and to invite our legislative leaders to tell us, do they believe in representative democracy or not? That's really the question. And that's the question that we want to bring to the polls for the primaries on May 15th. That's the question we want to bring to the polls for the general election in November. Do you, our legislative leaders, believe in representative democracy, or do you not? And if they do, we want them to put in place something where our votes actually do count. Because right now, we know our votes count very little. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Samuelson, and then we'll hear from the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here on a Monday night to talk about redistricting reform. We've had an extraordinary outpouring of bipartisan support all across Pennsylvania. The organization Fair Districts Pennsylvania has been leading the charge on this issue. There have been more than 340 meetings around Pennsylvania over the last couple of years, including about 18,000 people who've attended a meeting in person, including the 100 of you that are here tonight. So this is an issue that the public is very interested in, and I'm pleased to say that our legislators are very interested in. I want to start by acknowledging Representative Pam Delisio in the back of the room there. If Pam could stand up. She's from Manayunk and Roxborough in Philadelphia, and she's one of our lead sponsors. Pam is a Democrat. Our other lead sponsor, Eric Rowe from Chester County, couldn't be here tonight. He's expecting twins like today or tomorrow. So, do they come? Okay. We don't have any news, but today was supposed to be the day. But Eric has been very supportive of this legislation, and I handed out a chart of the sponsors of House Bill 722. We're up to 110 co-sponsors. And as you can see, we have many Democrats and many Republicans. We have 72 Democrats, 38 Republicans. It really is a true bipartisan effort all across Pennsylvania. One other thing about 110 sponsors, that's 55% of the House of Representatives. So if this bill would come up for a vote on the House floor, I am sure that it would pass. We already have a majority of the House members who have put their names forward as co-sponsors. And in the Senate, we already have 42% of the state senators who signed on and are co-sponsors. So tremendous outpouring of support. Here in Pennsylvania, we've been working on this issue actually for 15 years. We had a bill in 2002 sponsored by former Representative Sarah Steelman from Indiana County. I think she started with maybe 17 or 18 sponsors. Former Representative Tom Tangretti from Westmoreland County took over. We built it up to about 40 sponsors. 10 years ago, which was the last time we had to try to change the process before a redistricting, we had tremendous outpouring of support from the statewide League of Women Voters and a lot of bipartisan support all across Pennsylvania. We did get up to 95 co-sponsors by 2008, but then we ran out of time in order to change the process for the 2011 redistricting. So the 2011 redistricting, as you know, was conducted in the same process that we've had for many, many years here in Pennsylvania. It's a process controlled by party leaders. We need a process that's controlled by citizens, and I'm so pleased that we have some of the citizen commissioners here with us from California. This is a fundamental change that will lead to so many changes in our state government. I wanted to say, this bill, we have 2,100 bills in Pennsylvania that have been introduced in the current session, a 2-year session. Out of those 2,100 bills, this bill has the most co-sponsors of any bill. There's another one with 103, another one with 100, but this has the most support of any bill in the current two-year session. We absolutely should be bringing this bill up for a discussion in committee, and we should be bringing this bill up for a vote in the House of Representatives. And we are working very, very hard on that. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll have a meeting at 2 o'clock in the state capitol, a public meeting to talk further with the California commissioners and with Carol. And it's a meeting that's open to the public. If you're in the Capitol at 2 o'clock tomorrow, stop on by. We've timed it in the afternoon. Senator Fulmer is having that hearing, public hearing on the Senate bill at 9 a.m. We're having an afternoon meeting to continue the discussion. One point, Jean Hanley mentioned, thank you so much for organizing this event. What a tremendous turnout. She mentioned that the recent Supreme Court decision that's got a lot of press coverage that changed the congressional districts applied to the years 2018 and 2020. Well, you might ask, what happens after 2021? Well, the Supreme Court did not change the process. So after 2021, if we do not change this process, we go right back to gerrymandering in Pennsylvania for the next decade and the decade after that. So it is absolutely necessary that we change the process now so that the next time maps are drawn in 2021, it's a fair process that leads to fair districts. I love the title of your organization. We actually have two processes in Pennsylvania. For congressional districts, as you may know, it's a majority vote in the House and Senate, and the governor signs the bill or vetoes the bill. So whichever party is in power controls that process. In 2011, in Pennsylvania, it happened to be the Republican Party with the House and the Senate and the governor at the time. We do not know who will be in charge of the process in 2021 or 2031 or 2041. I believe that no politician should be in charge of the process. We should have citizens from all across Pennsylvania running our redistricting process. But that's the process that controls congressional redistricting. We also have a separate process that controls redistricting for state house and state senate seats. That is controlled by 4 party leaders sitting in a room. That's a process that's spelled out in our Constitution of 1968. On paper, it looks like, well, at least you have an equal number. You have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. But who are those 4 people? They are the 4 party leaders, the leader in the House and Senate of the Democratic Party and the leader in the House and Senate of the Republican Party. Their interests are to draw districts that make sense for them. We need districts that make sense for the citizens of Pennsylvania and the communities of Pennsylvania. And so my bill that we have tremendous sponsorship would basically take the politicians out of the room and replace them with an 11-member Citizens Commission. That's a fundamental reform that we need. We're trying to have the public hearing. We've sent a letter requesting a hearing from the chair of the State Government Committee. I sent that letter with Representative DeLisio and Representative Rowe. We sent it back on September 25th. So yesterday marks 6 months with no response from the leader of that committee. He said just last week in the Philadelphia Inquirer that he has no interest in the bill. So at least he told the Philadelphia Inquirer more than he's told us. That invitation, our desire to have a hearing before that committee remains firmly in place. We're still hopeful that we can make that happen. We're appealing to the leader of that committee. We're appealing to the House Majority Leader, the House Speaker. The time to have this hearing is now. We commend Senator Fulmer for taking the lead in the state Senate. He promised that he'd have a hearing after all the court cases were done about the congressional districts, and he kept his word, and tomorrow morning there'll be a hearing on the Senate bill. So we are trying to still appeal for that hearing to be held. If not, we're looking at other ways to try to get a vote on the House floor. There's a process where you can try to get a bill discharged out of committee if you have enough support. We're looking at that as a possible option in April if we cannot get the State Government Committee to take this bill up. Obviously, it'd be preferable if we had a vote in the State Government Committee and then a vote on the House floor, and then made sure we had enough time over in the State Senate to get this all done by June 30th. There's other ideas that we're kicking around. I'm trying to think of another idea that we really should have a rule in the House of Representatives that if a bill gets to a majority of support among all the current members of the House, it should be able to come up on the House floor. This would not be a cumbersome rule to enforce. If we had that rule in place right now, out of the 2,100 bills two of them would have met that standard and gone directly to a House vote. I'm going to propose that as a future amendment to the House rules, but the next time we'll be amending our House rules is next January. Too late for this, but to me, this experience has shown me that we should have a mechanism in place to make sure that a bill that has majority support gets at least a vote in the House of Representatives. So I want to thank you so much for all of your support. Thank you for coming out for this meeting. And really, our Constitution says, I think it's the very first sentence, all power is inherent in the people. So the legislators are responding to the tremendous outpouring of citizen support. We're hoping that our leaders in the House and Senate will respond to us. And thank you so much for all of the phone calls and personal visits you've made with your legislators. It sure has made a difference. Am I going to introduce you?
I'm going to stand because I can't see you if I sit. My name is Stan Forbes, and on behalf of the Commission, we are really glad to be here, and we want to thank the Harvard School of Government as well, because they were paying for this. Now, I'm not Mr. Technical here, but I'm going to see if I can find the right ones. Okay. Just to know that we had districts much like Pennsylvania's. This district here, this first one here on the left, in the yellow, was 200 miles long and was cut when the tide came in. Let's see here. Then this looks very much like the one that was sort of shown in the newspaper about the Pennsylvania district around Philadelphia, and that was well, they sort of grabbed, and that was a truly gerrymandered district. Anyway, a little history. In 1990, the legislature drew maps for themselves. There was no hearings, there was no public engagement. They just drew maps. 2000 rolled around, and they drew maps again. But this was an interesting thing because it was a bipartisan gerrymander. The only criterion for in 2000 was the reelection of the incumbents, and they were wildly successful. Between 2002 and 2010, California had 765 elections for Assembly, Senate, and Congress. 5 seats changed hands out of 765. So obviously they did their work very well. But the public was fed up with that, frankly. The League of Women Voters and Common Cause spent a lot of time negotiating with the legislature to see if they would sort of do the right thing. No luck. So in 2008, as it was noted, Prop 11 was passed. And then in 2010, we were given the authority also over Congress, the congressional seats. And the essence of Proposition 11 was to take the power from the legislature and give it to an existing Citizens Commission. In 2008, the public said no to this system of bipartisan gerrymandering because they believed, and we believe, that the vote belongs to the public. It does not belong to the legislature. Furthermore, gerrymandering, in fact, steals the right to vote from you. Because if you can't vote somebody out of office because they protected themselves by gerrymander, what does your vote mean? And there's no accountability. So getting rid of gerrymandering restores the meaningfulness in the right to vote and in the whole concept of accountability, which I think is the essence of our democracy. Well, the auditor's office, which is considered nonpartisan in California, was given the authority to pick the commission, to develop the process. And it was a substantial process. I don't deny that, and I'm sure my colleagues will not either. But 36,000 people applied. We had to write essays. We had to reveal all of our financial stuff. We could not be sort of political operatives. We had, in the last 120 of us, had 90-minute interviews. And so finally, 60 were picked. The legislature at that point got to blackball 24. So 36 came out of the process, 12 Republicans, 12 declined to stay, 12 Democrats. The first 8 of us, and Gene and I were a part of that 8, were picked using our lottery machine, and we were picked randomly. But an important component was that we then picked the other 6. And what that allowed us to do was to be sure that all parts of the state were represented. There was gender equality. There was, what's the last thing? What's the other thing? Regional representation. You couldn't have 14 people from Northern California. I mean, that would not work. It was important that we look like California, and we did. We really were California. There were 3 Anglos, 4 Latinos, 2 African Americans, 3 Asians, 1 Pacific Islander, 1 Native American. 6 of his own small businesses. We had NGO folks. We had a law professor. We had a gentleman who ran the U.S. Census twice. We had engineers. I mean, it was a pretty good representation of California. And I will say, and this I understand in some states is an issue, the characteristics were we were well educated, but also we were nonpartisan. I got to ask the question, is it possible to be nonpartisan? Aren't you all partisan? And the answer is no. You don't have to be partisan. And in fact, if your selection process works right, you get good government types, and that's all they care about. They don't care about whether they're Democrats. In fact, we were talking about how if, in fact, you put all 14 of us in a room and just talk to us, you would be hard-pressed to find out whether we were Republicans or Democrats, because we're here for good government. We're here so that we represent the people. We don't represent the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Greens or anybody else. We just represent the people, the voters. Well, as you'll hear, we conducted public hearings all over the state. We had everything we did was transparent, and I mean everything, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too, because that was a really important component. And the public got to see that what they had to say had direct impact on the maps. We looked at, the law required that we had, these are all in the law, constitutional population, the Federal Voting Rights Act, contiguity, it means basically they can't be 2 pieces like this. The integrity of cities, we did not want to split cities to the extent we could do that in the context of the others. But also, the important one there is the end here where it says communities of interest. Now, people define themselves by themselves, not by somebody else saying, you should be joined with these people. I represent largely agricultural area of Northern California. The farmers of Northern California do not have the same interests as inner city Los Angeles. They just don't. And there's no system you can create that's going to be able to take that kind of diversity into account. So we spent most of our hearings on that very issue. And perhaps Gene or Gil will speak about that further. But some of the things, so we came out with maps, we drew maps, everything was in public. We couldn't talk to the legislature. To give you an idea, there was a state senator who was a friend of mine, and she served on the city council in Davis with me. And I've known Lois for 30 years. We'd see each other in the Capitol, and she would not, we'd laugh. She said, can we even shake each other's hands? And I'm not sure that the only way the legislature could address us was to come to the microphone and talk to us. And we had Maxine Waters, for example, powerful congresswoman out of Los Angeles. She got her 2 minutes, and that's what she got. Everybody was treated the same in that regard. And we drew the maps, and the maps have been very well received, both by the press, but that we had, of course, we got sued. What a surprise. But by a Republican who didn't like his Senate seat. What was interesting was that the Supreme Court, which is 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat at the time, commented on how we had done it fairly, transparently, and consistently with the constitutional requirements. So in other words, the California Supreme Court, again, Republicans, thought we had done a terrific job. We've even been mentioned in The Economist magazine. Which that's sort of, for what I read, that's sort of the apex of praise. But there's a few things I just want to leave you with, questions that come up. You do not have to be partisan. The selection of commission is you get people who are nonpartisan. But also, we did not look, and we could not look, at where the incumbents lived. We didn't even look at the existing districts. We start with a blank map. And those are the mechanisms that you have that eliminate the issue of partisanship. Other thing we had, we were truly independent. The legislature was forbidden to speak to us, and they cannot remove us, except by impeachment. We're constitutional officers. We cannot be removed. There's other things that are independent, but the fact is, we are truly independent. And that's one thing. There's a couple of other citizens commissions in the United States, but in each case, the commissioners are appointed by the politicians. Doesn't work. Also, you don't need to be an expert to draw maps. I mean, intelligent, yes, but experts, no. Ordinary folk like us can draw maps just fine. There's no problem with that thing. In fact, it would actually be better because by not being experts, you're able to sort of bring together an ordinary person's point of view on drawing these maps. And that's something I think is better than just use experts. And conflicts or issues like that would come up, and you would have a sort of an ordinary person conversation, not an expert commenting. Lastly, you hear people say that, well, you're not elected, you're not accountable. But that's a false choice. There is no accountability with gerrymandering because you can't get the people out of office. So there's no accountability. So the real choice is, do you want to have your maps drawn by people like you who don't have any stake in this process, or do you want to have people who absolutely will have a stake in this process? That's the real choice, and you can decide for yourself which you consider to be more accountable. And with that, I will turn it over to Jean.
I'm going to stand up too because I'm even shorter than stand up there. Okay, one of my biggest interests in our process was the public engagement side, because without that, really what's the point of a citizen commission if you're not going to talk to your fellow citizens? So we actually had more than 34 hearings or opportunities for citizens to speak to the commission, because at every business meeting, there was a period of time when you could make, just like in a council meeting, you could come and comment on anything that was not on the agenda. So we heard from people all the time. In addition to the 22,000 written comments or maps that we received, everything that we received, when we talk about transparency, everything was posted on our website. In addition to the live streaming and so on, everything went up on our website. So you could go back and to this day, if you suffer from insomnia, you can go online and listen to us talk on and on about maps. At the public hearings, we had 2,700 people speak to us. And as Stan said, it really, ran the gamut from ordinary people like us to people like Maxine Waters, which I have to say was really a defining moment for me when I saw her get up and speak, and I looked at the person timing, hit the 2-minute mark, and it's like, sorry, your time is up. And she is if you don't know her, she is a force to be reckoned with. And interestingly enough, I think just as a side note, we actually drew her out of her district. But since you don't have to live there to be in Congress, she was okay. But I thought that was kind of another mark to me of how independent we were in the process. Let me go back for a second to the selection process as another part of the engagement with citizens. We were fortunate in California that the Irvine Foundation poured a substantial amount of money into informing people about the commission and the opportunity to apply. And that's probably why, in addition to the fact that it was a brand new thing, we got 35,000 plus applications. They also set up sites where citizens could go and kind of get some idea about what the mapping process would be. So that was all valuable in helping communities to organize and either present maps to us or come and offer testimony. And let me show you another slide here. Well, I think I have to go back to that one. This gives you an idea of the dispersal of population in California. If you can see those little yellow stars in Northern California, that represents 7 counties, and the average population is 35 per square mile, whereas San Francisco County has obviously a much higher population, 17,000 plus per mile. So reaching those people in Northern California, who, by the way, are now suing us and are kind of in secession mode from the rest of us in California, but reaching those people was really difficult. To take 14 commissioners plus staff on the road to very remote areas was just not economically feasible. And so that was why, people also had the opportunity to engage with us electronically. I do want to tell you one story about Reading, which is probably just somewhere below that lowest yellow star, but that's as far north as we went. One of our other Republican commissioners, Vince Baraba, tells the story, so I'm giving him credit for it. But he asked the question in Reading of people who were testifying, is there anybody that we're not hearing from? Is there someone that we should be hearing from in this community? And someone spoke up on behalf of the Sikhs and on behalf of the Hmong community. And that was just so moving that, that other residents of their area were eager to tell us about these other people who had very definite needs and interests that should be represented. And I think that's a good example of how deeply we reached into communities. As Stan said, we did not define a community of interest. It's in the Constitution. I'll go down to this. The basis for fairness, a community of interest is defined, a contiguous population that shares common social and economic interests. So when we heard testimony from people, it was the people telling us, citizens telling citizens, sharing stories and letting us know what was of concern to them. When we talk about the educational level of, we had this conversation in the car on the way over, that sometimes there's a lot of emphasis on the degrees that our commissioners have and our level of education. But I think it's important to recognize that many of us, if not all of us, come from families where we don't have generations of college graduates. We have unique social and cultural experiences too that we brought to the table and that helped us relate to, the whole range of citizens that comprise California. We are very proud to be citizen legislators, if you will. There was a time in the early days of our country when citizen legislators were admired, and somehow we've taken a detour, and we think that our commission has brought that back, and we would hope that other states will be able to take something from our experience and engage each other in this very important process. Thank you. I'll turn it to Gil.
I didn't wear this red jacket just to let you know I'm a Republican. I just happen to like red. But, on the way out here, we were praying, God, we hope we had good weather out here. But we have so far. This has been sunny all day, I think, right? So maybe we brought a little bit of California sunshine here. Thanks, everybody, for inviting us. We're very, very happy to share our experience in California. Stan and Jean talked about many of the issues that I want to talk about as well, but what I want to focus on is the transparency process that we went through in California. So what is transparency? Well, it's a glass window between you and the other party. No matter what you do, the other party can see what you're doing. And our entire process was very transparent. From our initial start in Northern California all the way down to San Diego, everything was publicized, everything was aired, everything was in real time. So whatever we did, whether we picked our nose or sneezed, everybody saw it. And every decision we made, whether right or wrong, we got corrected. People called in, they Instagrammed us, they sent emails, they Twittered us saying, have you considered this? Have you considered that? And we took those inputs, that information, as part of our deliberations and made the best decisions we felt reflected what these communities in different parts of California wanted to see in their area. I say that because these issues are not partisan issues. These are issues that are important to communities. And the citizens that we took public testimony from told us what was important to them in terms of economics, social issues, histories, what their beliefs and their values are. And that was important for us to try to determine then what is the proper definition of a boundary that reflects those communities' values. And in the end, I think when we went through this process, we did not realize that we were generating an enormous amount of confidence and trust in the public from what they were seeing. So halfway through our public process, we noticed that the public input was building up. So we had a momentum going that just got larger and larger and larger. And that's an important lesson to learn, because what we realized at that point is that the public was beginning to believe that there was a genuine body that was willing to listen to their voices. And if they came and voiced their opinion, those 14 peoples would take that input and consider it. And I think that's a lesson to learn everywhere, even in Pennsylvania, that it's ordinary people, just like you, that can make a huge difference in building that momentum. So, you know, we've been in Virginia about 2 weeks ago, and now here, and what we're finding out is a tremendous sense of hopelessness, learned hopelessness. You can't change anything. And you know, and then when we share our experience in California, they realize, you mean you guys did that, ordinary citizens? And we tell them, yes, we did that. And we generated momentum and enthusiasm that they can make a huge difference on who they want representing them. And I think that's the value that we want to share with you, because it happens at the grassroots level. If you take, this is a small group, but it's a powerful voice. Each of you have talked to 10, 20 people. It's unimaginable where this thing could go. So my hat and my compliments go off to Representative Steve Samuelson, because he's willing to take the charge, but you know, it's going to take the grassroots participation and enthusiasm and strength to get this thing going. And they will listen, and you'll get what you want. So that's my story.
Thank you, panel. At this point, we're going to go to the question and answer. And we had you fill out some cards prior to the program, and so we're going to look at some of those questions and see whether we can get some answers for them. This first one is for one of the commissioners, and you can pick who wants to answer this. The question is, how did you deal with some of the natural gerrymandering that occurs by those who tend to be more liberal and vote Democratic living in urban areas, and those more conservative and vote Republican living in more rural areas?
Okay. I don't think we did, to tell you the truth. Our job was to provide fair districts based on communities of interest. And if the community of interest happened to be, in my case, a rural part of California, then we had a rural district then. If it was a more conservative district, so be it. So I don't think we dealt with that sort of natural gerrymandering, because it's not, natural gerrymandering is something that the people choose to do themselves. Political gerrymandering is something that is imposed on them, and that's a huge difference. It was not our job to deal with the former. It was our job to deal with the latter.
Next question, once again for the commissioners. Some legislators say a group of citizens could never agree on maps. Can you talk about how the California commissioners worked out differences to produce final maps?
Oh, go ahead, Gil.
Well, I'll start, but I'm sure the three of us can add to it. We had differences. We had moments where in fact, there were 2 or 3 moments where we really had passionate differences. But the process was set up that we had 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents. And within each of these 3 groups, you had to have had a majority. So in the 5 Democrats, you needed 3. In the 5 Republicans, you needed 3. And in the independents, you needed, what was it, 3 too?
Yeah, 3.
So there were moments where we weren't, forgive me if I'm wrong now, the Democrats sort of worked together. And that was fine. We Republicans had moments where we hesitated. But when we did, we discussed it, and being the good civic-minded people that we were, we felt in the interest of California's future and generations to come, we had to make the right decision. And fortunately, we did that. So there were tough moments, but we worked it out.
Well, you know, we all came together as complete strangers, of course. But one of the things that really made a difference for us was the social aspect of our time together, because we were pretty much, you know, locked into spending a lot of time. I mean, we were out of, you know, away from home, mostly in Sacramento, but also on the road. The road trips, you know, it's like any other road trip. It's quite a bonding time. But we had dinner every evening, not all 14 of us, but a good number of us, and the group would sort of ebb and flow. But those social encounters gave us an opportunity to get to know each other as individual people, so that label, that party label, was no longer, you know, the most significant thing about you. You know, you spend enough time with somebody in a car and you find out about their kids, or, you know, I don't know, where they've worked, what their community is like, different, you know, just sharing all those normal conversations you have with other human beings. And I think that created that level of trust with each other, so that when you had a disagreement, and, you know, Gil is right, there were some very passionate moments. You know, you could kind of take a step back and just kind of listen a little better, I guess I would say. Listen to each other. I'm still thinking about this Democrat thing that you brought up. It's like, wait a minute, how did I get thrown under the bus?
And I think the other thing is that you had 14 people who were committed to making this work. And that was, I mean, so you sort of, as Jean said, you have a passionate deal, but then you recognized this must work.
Yeah.
So there's other points of view, so I'm going to be willing to compromise on things.
You know, it's important to know, too, that we were not permitted to have any conversation about mapping outside of public hearings. So when we went to dinner or anywhere else or on the road, there was not conversation about, well, what do you think about this district or that area or the testimony we heard or anything else? That was just strictly off limits.
You know, and I might add to that, the mapping process is highly technical, very complex. And as we proceeded down from Northern California down to San Diego, we realized that each of these pieces came together like a jigsaw. If you tweak one piece, it'll affect 10 others. And we had to make compromise that was in the best interest of Californians. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican didn't matter. You soon realize that the whole had to make sense. And that's an important lesson to learn.
This question is, I believe, for Representative Samuelson. And the question is, Governor Wolf just announced several redistricting reforms. Are these helpful? Are they distractions? Or both?
No, I think it's very helpful. I believe he had a press conference today and got behind House Bill 722 and Senate Bill 22, lending his voice to these two bills which have advanced. And these bills, when we wrote them, we based them on on previous work in the previous session. Former Representative Parker was prime sponsor of the bill in 2016. But we had a series of meetings with fair districts, with a lot of other interested folks from around Pennsylvania as we were drafting the bills. And we tried to make some improvements on the bills that had come before. So I am so pleased that he got behind our specific bills, and I think that will help us as we get towards the finish line.
Back to our commissioners. What were some of your biggest challenges and also biggest rewards?
Well, I think the biggest reward was the success of what we did. I mean, there's no question. I think if you ask any of the commissioners, this is, when we look back on our lives, this is going to be one of the real things that we contributed. It made a difference. I think, and I'm sure my colleagues have others to add, but I think the two biggest challenges for me was that the time crunch was awful. I mean, we got a full commission on December 31st, 2010, and we had to be done with the maps by July 31st. We had to do all the hearings, we had to do all the data. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about was as part of our transparency process, we had to write a report in which we justified every single map that we drew. So, I mean, you couldn't sort of put a fast one. There had to be a rational reason why you did it. So the time crunch was one, and the other one for me was the Voting Rights Act. That was very difficult, because in my view, the Voting Rights Act was built for a white-black world. California is anything but a black-white world. You've got Latinos, you've got Asians, you've got African Americans, you've got Anglos, you've got Jews, you've got gays, you've got Vietnamese, Hmong, I mean, South Asians, Indians. So, and to put that all together and deal with the Voting Rights Act was, I think, quite difficult.
I would say one of the biggest challenges I know it was true for all of us and for a number of the commissioners, was the time away from the rest of your life. This was actually billed as, it's a part-time gig. You can do it in the evenings. And believe me, it was anything but. I think one of our trips was 10 days, 10 days on the road. You get to where you forget what hotel you're in, or, we found ourselves using the wrong key, that was yesterday, that was the Radisson, now we're at the Hilton. So there was a serious fatigue factor, as well as being away from, for some people, one of our commissioners had 4 children under 8 when we started. And, the 3 of us had work, so we're working 2 full-time jobs. And I frequently like to acknowledge our various support systems, because whether it was a spouse or a business partner or our kids or whoever, somebody was keeping the home fires burning while we were out trying to do this job.
I think the biggest achievement that I think I've accomplished as part of the team was building public trust in the electoral system. Up until that point, I don't think Californians gave much interest in the electoral process. My students would tell me that. Why vote? It doesn't make any difference. My neighbors would tell me that. My colleagues would tell me that. But after we went through that process, I had a different tone that came back. And they showed up at public hearings, and they virtually told us, we think we finally have a commission that's listening to what we have to say. And I think some of the more recent polls are showing that public trust in California's electoral system is what's the figure now?
Well, in 2008, the legislature had a 10% approval rate. Recently, it's now up to 50%. So they may not think so, but it was really good and healthy for the legislative institution.
And that's a sea change, because I think it's learned behavior that they can't do anything. And once they see an ordinary citizens taking those steps, that give them a process where they can have a real choice in who's going to represent them has made an enormous difference. So that I'm very proud of.
Our senator, whoever asked this question, said she thought 11 commissioners were too few to represent 67 counties. Now, obviously, California is a lot bigger, and you have 14. But how does California answer that question as far as 14 people representing the numerous counties you have and the number?
Well, you know, the number of commissioners was not intended to be measured by how many people we, you know, assigned to each of us. That it wasn't that. It was to have the skills to meet the needs of all Californians, and that, you know, it had to be that big picture, that people were capable of looking at that big picture rather than looking at it, again, bringing it down to that level of, you know, my little neck of the woods is what matters. It wasn't that way. It was a global view. I don't want to add anything to that, either of you.
Go ahead, Gil.
That's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that for Pennsylvanians. But I do think that whoever is picked, whatever that number is, pick the best and the brightest, because it does make a difference. They're going to be drawing boundaries that are going to be having tremendous effect upon your lives, your children's lives, and grandchildren's lives. Who represents you also represents where your income is coming, where your support is coming for your nonprofits, for your businesses and industries. So it's really crucial that you have the right people that you pick. I'm not sure what that number is. Maybe that's something you have to decide.
Yeah, my comment would be that whether it's 11 or 13 or whatever it is, the question is it enough that all groups of Pennsylvania and all sort of regions of Pennsylvania are represented, feel they've got somebody here who can speak for them? There may not be the perfect person, but can they speak for them? And again, if you pick your commissioners correctly, I think that, I mean, I don't live in Southern California. I don't know Southern California very well. But that does not mean I can't hear information from Southern Californians and incorporate it into a good map. And I'll listen to Gene, who does know it, or Gil, who does know it. And I can incorporate that and come up with a good map. So whether 11's the right number, you know, I can't judge that. It's a number you have to be sure that all of Pennsylvania feels represented.
And that's an important issue. The commissioners that we have in California all have civic backgrounds. We've been involved in community planning issues, economic issues. I'm a former city planning commissioner and redevelopment director. So I was very, very aware of the economics and social issues in San Diego County. And we were aware that all of us represented different parts of California, and we were sensitive about those same boundaries as well. So while we didn't speak about that in much, the public testimonies that came towards us, we intersected our own backgrounds with those public inputs and helped shape those opinions. So in the final deliberations, I think it was a carefully crafted one that was seasoned and professional. So what that number is, I'm not sure. So I hark back to pick good commissioners that know your communities, know the regions in Pennsylvania.
This you might have answered, and it's kind of a follow-up to that. You may or may not know why 14 was chosen as your commissioner number, but do you feel that that was an adequate number, or do you feel a change would make the process better or improve the performance of the commission, or was that adequate?
Well, you know, I think we were fortunate in some ways that we gelled. And I think, again, a lot of that's attributable to being so committed to making this first effort succeed. I don't know if more people would would make it, I know it wouldn't make it any easier. I think we have to keep going back to, do you have a commission that knows and is willing to speak on behalf of your state, the various communities in your state? Are they willing to listen to all the communities in your state? I suppose that could be 7, it could be 10. The number is perhaps not as significant as the skill and the commitment that they bring to it.
So for those who drafted House Bill 22, Senate Bill 22 and House Bill 722, there was a lot of conversation about how do you put the numbers on a commission in a way that one person or one party can't hijack the process. That was a big piece. Not just let's choose a number and say this is the right number. It's how do you arrange the decision process so that you make it possible for there to be consensus in a way that if one person wants to shut down the process or one party wants to shut it down, you have some hope of coming to agreement. So I was interested to hear you mention that you had to have a majority from each group. So the way that House Bill 722 and Senate Bill 22 are arranged is there's 11, which in our conversation seemed Pennsylvania's not as large as California. It's not as diverse as California. So that seemed like it would be adequate to understand the state. But then numerically, how do you structure it so that you can have a reasonable vote? And so the idea was that it's structured in a way that you have to have a supermajority of 7, and you have to have at least 1 from each of those groups. So you don't have to have complete agreement in any of those groups, but at least 1 person from each group has to buy in. So that's the way the bills that we're working on are structured. I'm curious, though, how your bills were structured in terms of the decision process and how that played out for you in California.
Well, every decision that we made, not just the maps, but hiring and so on, had to be a 3-3-3 vote, a supermajority of 9. So when we hired our legal counsel, our VRA, our Voting Rights Act counsel, our mappers, all of those decisions had to be 3 from each pool. And I think generally, by the time the hiring decisions were one thing, but by the time we got to the mapping, we had that give and take down a lot better. So, I think it was ultimately, easier to reach that decision. But, 9 is a lot of people.
Well, I'm going to give you an example of something that I think did not work and has not worked. Arizona has an independent commission, but it's different from ours in that you have political entities, the legislators pick 2 Democrats and they pick 2 Republicans, and there's 1 independent. But they vote together. And so the only vote that matters is the independent chair. If you end up with 2-2. And that just doesn't work. So the ability to sort of ensure that everybody has to agree to some degree is a very important thing. Otherwise, you get this, you interject back in a partisan conflict, which I think is, really hurts an independent commission, or any commission for that matter.
If anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I agree with Stan. As we looked at the Virginia model and yours, and no offense, but I could see partisanship already being part of that structure that is being created. The California model completely took the partisanship out of the process, completely. So the 14 members, the initial process, we all, 30,000 something citizens had to submit 4 essays. First one, why do you want to become a commissioner? And you had to write a lengthy essay on that. They want to know why you're interested in this. Secondly, demonstrate how you have engaged in the public and resolved conflicts. And we had to write about that. Third, demonstrate that you're aware and you're familiar with California's vast geography and demographics. And we had to write about that, a lengthy essay. And then lastly, demonstrate that you have the analytic abilities to do maps. Demonstrate that you have those skills that are going to be required once you get onto that public forum and start drawing maps. Can you understand software and the numbers? So we had to address that. All 4 essays quickly narrowed the 30,000 applicants right down to those who are nonpartisan.
The auditor's office was, they came up, they were the reviewers, and they also were the ones who said, you got to write 4 essays. I mean, so the auditor's office set the standards, and then evaluated how well we had performed in those. I mean, other things, we had to basically reveal all of our finances. I had to declare a loan to my son. I mean, it was that level of detail. So, I mean, they were not going to have any conflicts of interest in this group. We also had to pledge ourselves to what I refer to as political nuns. We could not run for office for 10 years, which is the length of our term. We couldn't even be appointed to anything for 5. So, that was pretty.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we did study the California plan as we were developing our bill, and we tried to follow many aspects. We understand the California system, the 14 commissioners are 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents. With a slightly smaller commission, we went with 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 3 independents. We made sure that none of those people were selected by party leaders. It's folks who come forward and apply, and it's narrowed down by a series of random selections. A random selection to get it down to 120. People have to not be involved in politics for 5 years before. You cannot be a lobbyist. You cannot be a staff person. You cannot be an elected official. You can't be a candidate. So anybody who's had any partisan involvement over the previous 5 years is ineligible. Then after you get down to the 120, we do allow the party leaders to strike 24 people, as they do in California. Some people have asked me, why do you do that? Well, you could actually have somebody who gets through that who gets through the random selection, who might have been active in politics 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. If former Governor Ed Rendell or former Governor Mark Schweiker applied, they would actually meet that 5-year requirement, but maybe that would be a stage in the process where party leaders on both sides might say, this might not be the best person for this commission.
Right.
Still impossible, in my view, to stack the deck, though, because that just gets it from 120 down to 96. From 96 to the final 11, a second random selection. So as in we followed what California did with 2 random selections and allowed the party leaders to strike some folks in the middle. And so that's, to me, a very important process is that we do not allow the party leaders to pick these folks. It's average citizens who step forward, who meet these requirements of not being involved in politics before, 5 years before, and also 3 years after. You have to not, we have it spelled out in the bill, things you cannot do for 3 years after you serve. So we tried to do those kind of safeguards to make sure that we don't have political influence in the selection of these commissioners.
Let me offer one thought that was reflected in ours. The question is, and we've had this in the legislature, why are you guys still around? You do the maps. Well, the fact of the matter is, those maps we can be sued on those maps at any time. And so the effort to sort of have to recreate a commission is cheaper and more efficient just to let us exist, and we have this lawsuit that was filed last week. I mean, and that kind of stuff happens. And I think that's something you might want to consider, is how do you handle, it's 3 years on or 5 years on, and you have political people back, what happens? I mean, just what happens in that situation? Just a thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, we of course are very enthusiastic about how our work turned out, and we're very positive about the process, but looking ahead to our next commission, we have some concerns about the possibility of gaming the system, in that if you only had to be, when we applied, we didn't have 5 years beforehand to decide how to register. People have had that time period now. So there's the possibility of a lot of stealth independence applying for the next commission. And I think that's, that depending on the time in which, your your commission comes to fruition, that's something to be mindful of. In California also, the fact that, some people feel that now 5, 5, and 4 does not correctly represent the voting groups in California. So this is, I think, even for California, it's a work in progress. There may still be more, amendments.
The protection we put in for that is that if you're applying to be on this commission, you can't have changed your party within the previous 3 years. So if you were trying to, if you're going to apply to be one of the Republicans, you have to be a Republican 3 years before you apply for this. So that would have already, if you're applying for this in the year 2020, you would have had to change by 2017. So we put that in to try to make sure we have people who are Republicans, people who are Democrats, and people who are independents.
And the way we address the gaming, because that did come up, and has come up, is that you look for commissioners who have enough civic experience to know when they're trying to be gamed. So it was true that the Democrats in California tried to manipulate the system, but it didn't work because we were savvy enough to say, that's what's going on here, just, blow them off kind of thing.
I owe Steve an apology. I didn't know you covered a lot of the grounds we did. Great legislation.
Thank you, Representative Samuelson. Another question for the commissioners. I think you might have answered some of this, but how difficult was it to come up to speed on how to draw district lines and maps? Did you need to call on professionals, attorneys, consultants, et cetera? And if so, did this degrade the independence of the commission and its final product? And I know, Jean, you had mentioned about lawyers and things, but.
Well, yes, of course, we had to hire professionals. We hired a mapper. We hired our Voting Rights Act counsel, and those people all went through very intensive interviews by the commission before the contracts were awarded. So naturally, there was criticism, oh, you're hiring somebody who's, too democratic, or somebody who's too liberal, or this, that, or the other. But they went through a very thorough vetting. They had to disclose any conflicts of interest and so on. So we did have to hire those people because obviously the majority of us, I think there were a couple of commissioners who were in fact quite knowledgeable about the Voting Rights Act, but the rest of us were not. And certainly we had never done mapping before, but you need someone with that technical expertise. You kind of could be sitting where we sat, the same kind of setup at McGeorge Law School, and you'd be looking at this screen behind me here, and the mappers would be sitting over here with their computers taking direction from the commission, throughout a meeting and moving things around to come up with the maps. And because we had our constitutional criteria to follow, it was, I think that really made it easy.
Yeah, it really
you
wasn't.
just followed the
We would have
rules.
situations where they'd say, okay, this district has a high Latino population. We have to get to the number so we don't violate the Voting Rights Act. And we had all the data from the census, and they would take tracks, and move this group of people into this, so we get the Voting Rights Act number up to the number we needed. Or if you're going to be accused of packing a district, they had to pull some out, which would mean they would then have the ability to bring some back in. But it was not. It was putting a puzzle together, but it was not, I don't think, particularly difficult when we had the Voting Rights Act attorney and the mappers telling us, you can't do that, or here's how, we tell them we want to do that, and they would do it.
And the setting is very similar to this. We had just ordinary citizens like you sitting up there. And it's been broadcasted real time to all of California. So Gene and I and Stan and I are looking at a map, just like that, and we're saying, well, we've got this data that we have to consider. Technical support, if we added that piece there, how would that look like? And they would literally visually show how that's done. And the whole public would see that. And we'd get comments back, some good, some bad. And we had to make a decision. But the public was involved in the very line drawing itself.
We all had a laptop. We had our personal cell phones because we were still trying to keep somewhat connected to our other life. And we had a commission-issued BlackBerry, which we had because of issues of discovery for potential litigation. Most of us did not want to have to turn over our personal phones for discovery. We did eventually, because of the litigation against the maps, had to give access to our lawyers to our computers. That was a struggle for some of us to do that, but that's just the way it was. We had all this technology sitting here and trying to manage all of it.
So I just want to say, this is written into the bills that we support, that everything would be open to the public, that everything would be transparent, that all data used would be available, but that all transactions of, looking at maps, conversations, all of that would be public accessible. Think about how they're done right now. We have no idea. We still, we've been through 3 lawsuits with our congressional district maps, and yet we still have no idea who drew that map, what data they used, and why they did it. No idea at all. So think about the difference of being able to know, this is the data that's used and nothing else. These are the decisions that were made, and here's the reason why. Think of the difference that would make to the way that our elections are run.
We would require that data to be made available when it's collected at the beginning of 2021. It would be shared with the public the same data that the commissioners would have, the public would have access to. We also prohibit the commissioners from considering things like they prohibit in California. You cannot use the address of any individual or candidate. You can't look at the political affiliation of registered voters. You can't look at previous election results. So you can look at all the census data, but not take into consideration partisan considerations or where some incumbent lives or where some challenger lives. That information is off limits to the commission.
This is kind of a two-part one, and they fit together. This is for the commissioners again. What evidence, facts, experience show that cronyism, incumbency, biases, and partisan political manipulation are reduced by a citizens commission? And the follow-up is, what impacts, positive or negative, have you seen on the voting process as a result of the implementation of the CRC?
Well, I think you can look at the proof of the pudding as the election that took place in 2012 and what happened. Remember, I had said that we had 5 seats change in 10 years in California. In the 2012 election, we had 38 new members of the Assembly out of 80. We had 14 new members of the State Senate out of 40. We had 13 new members of Congress. 4 were defeated, and 9 chose not to run because they didn't want to run in the new district. Those are significant changes. And so that's also, I think, another important consideration. I don't know if I mentioned this or not earlier, I might have. The average margin of victory was 37% prior to our maps. The new margin of victory is under 10% across the state. So clearly these districts are more competitive, and that's, well, that wasn't a goal, but the fact we do the maps based on basic community of interest, they became more competitive, and that to me is the proof in the pudding.
The question is, there has been concern and pushback about a special master, and I know we've all, when we've talked to legislators, had this brought up to us. But anyway, there's pushback about a special master being brought into the process. My understanding is that that is a possibility even under our present process. Could somebody please respond?
Sure. Some of my colleagues have expressed concern about 3 sentences on page 12 of the bill, where if the commission does not meet its deadline, they have a series of deadlines. They have to get a preliminary map by July 1st, a final map by August 15th. If they can't agree on a final map by August 15th, they have to put out a separate second preliminary map by September 1st and a final map by October 15th. And they've committed a year of their lives to this process. So this isn't a section of the bill as what if they don't meet the deadline? I'm very, very confident that citizens who've stepped forward to be part of this process are going to meet the deadline, and we will have a final map by October 15th. But in the very highly unlikely event that there is no map on October 15th, it goes to the state Supreme Court, which is very similar to what happens in the current process. In the bill, we have 3 sentences that would say that the court should hire a special master. We have already agreed that those 3 sentences will come out of the bill, and we'll just leave it. In the event that goes past October 15th, it goes to the state Supreme Court, which is very similar to what's in the Constitution right now about what happens if the current commission does not meet its deadline. If we had a public hearing, we could offer that as a formal amendment. The first chance we get to bring this bill up, we've already made that commitment. So that change will be made on page 12 of the bill. And also, if we can have a hearing on this bill, we can also discuss other suggestions. I know sometimes some of my legislative colleagues say they have a problem with this sentence or that sentence or this part of the bill. My thought is they have to see the forest for the trees. If they are not willing to support a nonpartisan independent redistricting commission because of 1 or 2 sentences that they have a concern with, they are defending the current system, which is controlled by party leaders. And if we don't make our deadline to make this change in our state constitution, we will have the current system of gerrymandering for another 10 years. So let's discuss the bill. Let's bring up amendments. Let's get the bill in a form that it can pass the House and the Senate and get this done by June 30th.
I'd just like to say, with regard to the special master, the idea was that if there is a deadlock or there's not the ability to have a good map that is agreed on, and it goes to the Supreme Court, what you end up in is the situation where the Supreme Court, that the justices are not going to draw a map. Let's just be clear. They will never draw a map. They will select a special master. That's what will happen. And that's what did happen here in Pennsylvania not too long ago. The justices said this map is unconstitutional. We will select a special master. What happened after that? We've had 2 appeals. How many millions of our dollars have been spent appealing the selection of a special master who drew a map and gave it to us? So the idea of putting the special master provision there was simply that by precedent, there was a special master. I don't know if you know this. In 1991, there were numerous legislative appeals of the Democratic gerrymander here in Pennsylvania. I was reading through the history of those lawsuits, and there was a special master chosen who gave the legislature 2 weeks to draw a map. 2 weeks. That was back in 1991. And you can go back and read that case. Special masters have been used across the country in numerous lawsuits. There's been great studies done that no special master drawn map has ever been successfully appealed. They are fair, they are done quickly, and they hold when they're taken to court. So when we wrote the bill, when we talked through the bill, it was, well, if you end up in a standoff, what would happen? It would go to the Supreme Court. What would they do? They would choose a special master. What would the legislators do? They would sue. And so the idea was, is it possible that we could build a bill that would spare us all the chaos and conflict that comes from that happening? And we're watching it play out now. So before we say we will take those lines out, which we're perfectly willing, I'm not the one doing it, our legislators are doing it, but I mean, certainly if that's the only holdup to the bill, sure, take out those sentences. But first I would like to say to our legislators, how's it working for you? Can we fix this? And I think we would be much better off just saying, by law, that's what will happen. Can we skip the appeals? We know where they end. Read the precedent. Why are we wasting our time? Let's just agree. If this happens, it goes to a special master. Could we do that? I would think the adults in the room would say, yes, please, let's. How many adults we have in the room, that remains to be seen.
And on that,
I'm thrilled we have 110 co-sponsors. If we take those sentences out, we may be able to get a few more. Those sentences have caused some consternation As I said just a couple minutes ago, this is in a section of the bill that I do not think would be ever implemented, because I do not think a citizen commission that has devoted, 9.5 months of their life to gathering testimony all across Pennsylvania and drawing fair maps would miss that deadline. So we will just shorten that sentence up to, in that unlikely event, it would go to the Supreme Court, so there would be a map. Now, later on in the bill, we do acknowledge that any challenges to the map, any lawsuits that are filed about the map, they would go to the Supreme Court, which is the current process as well.
Before Jean ends us, which she's about to do, I just want to say, for those of you who are wondering, what are they talking about? We have a wonderful website, fairdistrictspa.com, which explains gerrymandering. It explains the bills that we support. There's a page on our website called District Maps, where you can zoom in on district maps and actually look at what's been done to us, not just in our congressional districts, but our House districts and our Senate districts. Look closely and see what it looks like. But there's a lot of material on that website that explains the situation, explains what we're trying to do. There's a petition on there that you could sign. We're also planning a rally for April 16th here in Harrisburg to call attention to our strong desire to have these bills heard, to have them enacted, to move forward on this reform. So we encourage you to take a look at the website, join us on April 16th, and we're so appreciative of the commissioners for joining us to help us continue this national conversation. It's an important one. It's one of the things we've been saying lately, until this changes, nothing changes. There are so many issues we care about, and yet we will not see those move until we have a responsive legislature. So until this changes, nothing changes. So join us in helping this to change.